Welcome to this webinar on how to increase disability self-identification and self-disclosures. This is a collaboration between JobTarget and Disability Solutions. I'm your host, Tim Tratine. I'm the head of compliance services at JobTarget, and I'll be taking your questions through the dashboard and talking about poll questions and anything else that may be coming up through the webinar. So JobTarget does a variety of different things. Our compliance service can get your jobs to state workforce agencies, to a variety of different diversity sites, local community-based organizations. We also have a marketplace with over 25,000 job sites on, diversity post package that has, I think, about 25 different diversity sites on now if you want to expand your reach. Programmatic, we can develop recruit sites for you, and media services for those job board contracts that you have. We can actually manage those for you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters, Kevin McCloskey and Keith Meadows of Disability Solutions.
Thank you, Tim. Much appreciated. We're glad of our partnership with JobTarget and to be here today. Again, my name is Kevin McCluskey. I'm on your left. I am the Director of Partnership Development with Disability Solutions. And on your right, you have Keith Meadows, who is the Hiring and Engagement Consultant for Disability Solutions. And although we have different titles, we pretty much do the same thing. And that is that we manage our employer clients in their efforts in attracting and hiring talent with all types of disabilities. And we do that by developing and managing federal, state, and local talent partners all across the country. We also work closely with employers to educate them on the benefits of hiring talent with disabilities. And we also provide employers tools to help them best engage and support potential and current employees with disabilities. If you look on the bottom right there, that's our logo. We are Disability Solutions at Ability Beyond. Ability Beyond is our parent company. It's a nonprofit based out of Connecticut and New York, and it has provided services to individuals with disabilities for over 60 years. Disability Solutions is what we call a consulting arm of Ability Beyond, and it was really created to help employers implement some successful initiatives to go out there, recruit, hire, retain, and promote talent with all types of disabilities. Our motto here is changing minds and changing lives. We like to change the minds of employers, and we do that through education such as this, success we've seen with other employers, and proven methods that work, and again, hiring people with disabilities. And that then results in changing the lives of job seekers with disabilities who turn into successful employees working for our clients. Part of what we do is our Disability Solutions Career Center. So you can see all of our employers that we work with on the screen there. We, again, post our jobs on our site, and we do that proactive outreach to about 8,000 different talent partners who support and work with job seekers with disabilities. All right, so let's get to the meat of today's presentation. We have a few learnings that we want you to take away today. First, we're going to educate you on the different types of disabilities, the benefits of tapping into this typically untapped pool of talent. We'll talk about the difference between self-identification, self-disclosure, and making a public announcement. We'll talk a little bit about the legality side of it all. We also want to touch on why job seekers and employees do not self-identify, and most importantly, how you can increase your own self-identification numbers at your company. As with most of these webinars, we like to start with some knowledge and stats related to hiring people with disabilities, and then we'll get into the meat of today's presentation. Keith, I'll throw it over to you to tell us for our poll.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So our first poll today is, what is your current self-identification rate for disability? And I'll have our famous host, Tim, launch the poll here. So you've got your selections. You can just take a second to answer in the most appropriate way for you. Then Tim will put the results on our screen.
Okay, give me a moment here. Okay, gonna close the poll. All right.
All right, excellent. So it looks like we got some folks who are doing great, but they'd love to increase those, and some have no idea. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that the no idea response is probably the most common. So you're not alone. And for those of you who are doing great and would love to increase, thank you for being here as well. We hope to provide some tips for each party here with some actionable items. So before we get too deep, I'll go to our what is a disability. Here we go. So before we get too deep into self-identifying as a person with a disability, we think it's important to take a step back and define the word disability. There's a lot of confusion when we think about that word, and the actual definition is very broad. If you're like a lot of us, you may think of maybe those with physical disabilities at first, maybe somebody missing an arm or missing a leg, or maybe you think of that symbol of disability that's everywhere, the wheelchair. But we're going to walk you through two examples that show you how nuanced that definition can actually be. First on the docket, we've got a definition from the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA for short, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It defines a disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And the key phrase we want you to keep in mind here is physical or mental impairment. Next, we have another slide that touches on disability. It includes both physical and also hidden disabilities, such as depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders, or ADD or ADHD. And all of those right there, those are all hidden disabilities. And many people are surprised when they find out that those conditions, and maybe even themselves, they fit the definition of a person with a disability or a disability. We like to say half of the battle is awareness, and we put a few people that you may recognize here on your screen. I'll start clockwise with the lower left. Tom Cruise, famous actor, has actually overcame dyslexia, which is a learning disability. Next, we have Julia Louis-Dreyfus of Seinfeld and Veep fame, who is a cancer survivor. Next, everybody recognizes that face on your screen, right? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, famous actor, you name it, he's probably in it, commercials, the whole 9 yards. Actually has spoken publicly about his battles with depression in the last couple of years. And finally, in the lower right, you have a photo of me from a JCPenney studio. I have virtually nothing in common with these people, except that I have a disability as well, a hidden disability. Severe asthma, I've had that my whole life. In addition, dyslexia, ADD, depression, being a cancer survivor, those are also hidden disabilities. Interesting statistic that we want you to keep in mind today, and after today's training, is that of all the disabilities out there, 70% are hidden or not readily noticeable. And we usually shock a lot of people when we mention that some of those conditions you see on the left side of your screen actually fit the definition of disability. A lot of people just simply view these as medical conditions, and they don't know that they fit the definition of a person with a disability, and oh, by the way, could be checking that self-identification box for you also. So it happens pretty frequently after these trainings, whether it's in person or whether it's afterwards. We'll get a comment, whether it's email or hey, I have a disability and I didn't even know it until this training today, and that's okay. As we'd like to say, knowledge is powerful, and that's what we're hoping to share with you today. So I'll throw it back to Kevin. He's going to walk you through the right terminology to use when we talk about disability.
All right, thank you, Keith. So as we continue to educate employers, we start with the simple yet important piece on how to address a person with a disability, a common question we usually get. This knowledge is something you can take on right now, and you can definitely make a ripple effect of difference in the world. As you'll hear throughout this presentation, we prefer to use person-first language. Now, we definitely realize everyone is a bit different on their choices and opinions and their likes and dislikes. But again, we choose using person-first language with really an emphasis on deleting some of these terms from your vocabulary. Don't be worried if you still say some of these terms. It does take time to break some of those old habits. So again, we often hear how we address a person with a disability. So often we hear the disabled, the handicapped, the cringeworthy R word still heard out there. Differently abled, special people, challenged people, crippled people. All these words we believe have a bit of a negative label associated with them. When you say there's a disabled car on the side of the highway, it means that car doesn't work or it's not functioning properly. So when it comes to really, especially employment, calling a person disabled is kind of the same thing. It doesn't work, it's not functioning properly. That's why we choose putting the person first, or honestly keeping the disability off altogether. I don't go around calling Keith with asthma or Keith with a disability. I call him Keith. And we definitely don't want the individual defined only by their disability. And companies are definitely taking notice. As you can see, Keith and I travel a lot, and we came across this beautiful pamphlet at Epcot that's titled Guide for Guests with Disabilities. Just has a nice ring to it. And also in 2019, Major League Baseball changed the old disabled list to the injured list. And they made this change out of concern that the term disabled for injured players falsely compares disabilities with injuries, and also that inability to participate in sports. Again, this is a small educational piece to get employers and really people not only thinking differently, but talking differently as well. Again, education and impact you can make right now. All right, so let's talk about the opportunities within employment of people with disabilities. As of 2018, roughly 1 in every 4 Americans have some type of disability, which makes people with disabilities the largest talent group out there. Not only are people with disabilities the largest talent group, they are typically an untapped pool of talent. As we all know now, the unemployment rate does fluctuate from time to time. However, there's one number that is going to stay consistent, and that is the unemployment for individuals with disabilities is roughly double that of those without. So a few factors include those common fears and stigmas that companies still have around recruiting and hiring people with disabilities that we hear almost every day. Job seekers with disabilities are often pigeonholed into the same entry-level positions. They might just do part-time or temporary work as well. Or they might have other barriers to employment, such as lack of transportation or use of medical devices if they need it. One silver lining we're seeing with this whole COVID-19 is that, March and April, all of a sudden, a lot of us were working from home and getting accommodations without disabilities. People with disabilities have been asking for work at home opportunities, and they've been qualified and they're great workers. They've been asking for these for years and years and being declined those opportunities. And now all of a sudden we're forced to work from home. We got extra laptops, we got Wi-Fi's, we got all this equipment and accommodations to help us do our job at home. So I'm hoping there's a silver lining in this whole last year, opening some more opportunities for people with disabilities. Again, what we do here is we work with employers, again, to squash these fears and stigmas and look at the talent rather than the disability. When we're helping employers hire people with disabilities, it's proving the point that they can do the job just as good or better than those without disabilities. All right, so when your company starts to outreach and recruit this untapped pool of talent, your company is not simply, doing the right thing or checking the box to be compliant. I can guarantee you're going to strengthen your workforce. Over the past 8+ years, working with large employers such as Pepsi, Lind, and Synchrony, we've seen that the benefits are definitely endless. Remembering what we all just heard from Keith around those different types of disabilities, 70% being invisible, 30% visible, you can definitely understand the different, talent that comes with this specific population. We've hired warehouse workers, we've hired salespeople, we've hired managers, engineers, scientists, all with some type of disability. The talent ranges from transitioning high school students, who we like to say haven't picked up any unhealthy work habits yet, all the way to baby boomers who possibly aged into a disability, who come with years of experience and degrees, and then you have everyone in between. We'll talk a little bit about retention. Most HR teams understand, that dollar amount that comes from every employee turned over. But also don't forget about those headaches that come along with the hiring process and possible production lost when that employee just doesn't work out, whether they're let go or they quit. The retention rate for people with disabilities is often equal or higher than those without. And we've seen with our clients a roughly about an average of 14% higher retention rate for people with disabilities. We'll talk a little bit about Pepsi here. Over a 5-year span, we saw Pepsi's applications of people with disabilities spike 550% over 5 years. And that led to a spike of 330% of hires with disabilities. So again, when you're out there and taking some of these tips that we're going to give you, you're going to see a huge uptick of applications, which turn into hires. You'll see the talent with disabilities out there. All right, it's known that diverse hiring increases productivity, creativity. It's also going to affect your employer's internal and external reputation. Employers are always looking for innovative ways to really attract and hire from these diverse populations. Well, I got a little surprise for you. There is diversity within disabilities. We like to say that disabilities don't discriminate. Much like the veteran population, individuals with disabilities help you hit on all the diversity metrics, including African American, Hispanic, Asian, women, and so on and so forth. Therefore, when you are hiring people with disabilities, you're also going to increase your diversity outreach and hiring metrics all across the board. All right, now we're into the meat of the presentation. Let's talk a little bit about the different types. So an individual has really 3 opportunities to tell a company that they have a disability. First is self-identification or self-ID. The second is self-disclosure. And the third is making a public announcement. We want to take a time to highlight these 3 opportunities because it can mean different things to different people. So the first we have is self-identification, again, or self-ID. Self-identification is when employers are asking applicants or employees to check the box that they have a disability. The options are yes, no, or I do not wish to answer. Self-identification is much less public than the next 2. And as with all of these, self-identifying or self-disclosing as a person with a disability is a personal choice. So the second is disclosing a disability, which is the process of communication that reveals information about oneself to another. For disabilities, self-disclosing typically comes when the job seeker or employee requests a reasonable accommodation. Self-disclosure is a little bit more public and involves that job seeker or employee basically reaching out to their HR or their manager, letting them know they have a disability to make that formal request for a reasonable accommodation. Job seekers and employees do not have to get incredibly specific with the details of their disability unless it's really necessary for that specific request. For example, we'll use an individual who is visually impaired. They might need a screen magnifier for their computer, and the information that they need to provide should be that the individual is visually impaired, rather than going into all the details of the diagnosis or the symptoms that come along with it. Now, disclosing a disability, again, can be a very difficult situation for both parties, right? The job seekers and employees and the employers themselves. To ease these concerns, we have a couple tips for you. Employers' accommodation requests should be first clearly accessible. They should be easy to find them in your intranet or whatever you use for communication. It should be communicated, and it should be a really easy process, an interactive process at that. An inclusive and welcoming employer makes the situation that much easier. Again, a little bit of fear on both sides, but mistakes can really cost employees their jobs and companies their money. So self-disclosure enables the job seeker or employee to best perform their jobs, again, with a reasonable accommodation. All right, the last we have is a public announcement. This is where the individual is comfortable in their workplace and their work environment enough that they let their coworkers and friends know that they have some type of disability. It could be a benefit for employers if this person can be an ambassador for your company or your program or some kind of ERG group that you might have if they're comfortable doing so. But more importantly, it's really helping that employee be productive and comfortable bringing their whole self to work and being able to be that wonderful person that you're looking for to do the job. All right, so as an employer, why are you asking? Why are you asking job seekers and employees really to identify as a person with a disability, whether it be during that application or the onboarding process or when you're asked to do it every year or so? As federal contractors, employers are legally required to ask this information. Federal contractors need to hire a workforce that reflects the American population. And we all know now, right? People with disabilities are definitely included in that. 1 in 4 Americans have that disability. Therefore, federal contractors need to be going out there and recruiting and hiring people with disabilities. And more importantly, collecting this data is the way to track that employer's progress. This type of identification information is typically only available to a small number of individuals in the company, such as a chief diversity officer. It should not be used against any potential or current employee. Employers are definitely, over the last 5-10 years, they are definitely becoming more and more disability friendly, and it's becoming more of a pride play for the disability community to go out there and proudly check the box for employers known for being inclusive to people with disabilities. Once again, job seekers and employees are not required to check yes or no. That's why I have that other option. This is a personal choice for them. But again, the more inclusive you are, the more these numbers are going to increase, as we've witnessed with our clients. Keith, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. So, most companies are focused on increasing their self-identification numbers. So we're going to spend a good chunk of time on that. But we want you to also know this, self-disclosure is important as well. And a lot of these tips are going to work there too, so that people are more comfortable feeling, making those reasonable accommodation requests or even having those conversations. But in order for us to be able to help drive an increase in self-identifications, it's really important to understand when job seekers and employees can actually self-identify, so we can understand where those places of impact are. So there are actually 4 different times that self-identification can occur. The first being at that application. So during that initial job application, applicants are going to get that voluntary self-identification form, usually in a digital format. And it's going to ask them if they're a person with a disability. It's going to provide them with 3 different options. They can check yes, they can check no, or they can check I do not wish to answer. And if they make it through the hiring process and they receive an offer from you, they'll also get another opportunity to do so during the onboarding process. Usually in that new hire paperwork in the first day or 2, or maybe even right before that first day. Another area is employees can get the opportunity to update their self-identification status or change it every 5 years in a rotation that's determined by the government. And finally, and this one's pretty critical, depending on your company's systems in place, an employee can actually choose to change their self-identification status at any time if your company has the software and the capabilities in place to do so. And usually this information is found on the company's intranet or a login portal, where employees can log in with their employee ID. They can see maybe their last paycheck stub, their W-2, benefits, things like that. Usually in there is included the opportunity to change their self-identification status. Now, your company can choose to devote time to increasing self-identifications for all of these different levels, or you may choose to focus on a specific one. And we just want to provide you with some tips that are going to help you for each of those. And our overall goal today is to arm you with some information that you may not have been aware of that can really actually make a difference. And that leads us into our next poll question. I'll have our esteemed host, Tim, put this one up. And if you could answer honestly, this is anonymous, so answer this question. Nobody's watching. And Tim, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, I'll launch this right now. Would you self-identify as a person with a disability with your employer, your current employer? Okay, just give it about 10 more seconds here, and then I'll close it out and display the results. All right, close this out here. Thanks for everyone that participated. There we go.
All right, excellent. We got some pretty inclusive folks on the webinar today. 79%, yes, absolutely. 14% would have to think about it, and 7% absolutely not. And we love asking this question because a lot of folks say yes, but then a surprising amount say absolutely not. So we'd like to think that we've got a little bit of helpful information for each party here. So we'll go back to our tips here, and we'll show you what you can do. All right, so start with yourself. Now that we know that broad definition of disability and we're starting to use that person-first language that Kevin taught you, those are two concepts that you can immediately put into place on a very personal level. We all know company culture is simply a collection of its individuals, right? But if we can make these small changes, they can actually have a large impact on voluntary self-identifications. So we'll get into that in a bit more detail, but ultimately, if you want people to identify as a person with a disability in your company, they need to feel that your culture welcomes them. And also, as strange as it seems, they need to know that they have a disability. So we went through disability, the definition, person-first language, and the legal aspects of when you can self-identify. But really, the real question that companies always ask us is, why don't job seekers or employees self-identify as a person with a disability? Why don't they check that yes box on that form? And so for our purposes today, we've summarized all of those reasons into 3 specific reasons from the job seeker and employee level. And those 3 are fear, education, and company culture. So we're going to walk through each of these reasons, and we'll let you know why individuals do not check that yes box. And we'll provide you with some tips where you can combat those reasons and make them feel more comfortable checking yes. So first up we have is fear. So the use of that self-identification form is very often misinterpreted. It still is today. We talked with job seekers with disabilities. There is a general belief that by checking yes, that they are a person with a disability on that form, it will be used against them in the hiring process, or it will at a minimum be visible. And if we think about it, that isn't that much of a logical stretch, right? I mean, you complete that online application, and if you're lucky, that application makes it to some sort of hiring manager or decision maker. And in the job seeker's mind, that same hiring manager can see the application information and also the disability information because they were submitted at the same time, right? And they'll notice that they're a person with a disability. And perhaps the best visual is just imagine that you're clicking send on that job application online, and that application goes right away to the hiring manager at the company. They print off the application and say, oh man, this person has a disability. I don't think so. That's a bit streamlined, but it really does capture the fear of and prevents people from self-identifying as a person with a disability. Now, we all know that disability is also a loaded word in our society. So sometimes, we choose to fly under the radar. We try to blend in, and we try not to have spotlights put on us for any reason whatsoever. We can worry that checking yes gets us screened out of the process immediately. And maybe in the past, if we're being honest, maybe it has. Many people with disabilities are even coached to not self-identify based on that faulty logic of today's culture. So another way that fear can hurt your self-identification rates is with your company's reputation in the community. So guess what? People with disabilities are just like everyone else. If your company is a great place to work, they will spread that. If your company is a challenging place for people with disabilities to work, guess what? That will spread even faster. So all of this filters out into the local community, which includes community-based organizations who help job seekers with disabilities find employment. And so your company can become known as a great place to work, or one that isn't even worth messing with as far as disability employment. Also coupled with fear is often the fear of your existing employees. Are people with disabilities currently working there? I'm here to tell you that that is true. 1 in 4 people have a disability, and it doesn't go away on a company-by-company basis. Within your company, is there pressure to blend in or conform to a certain mold, or is diversity celebrated? And usually those two go hand in hand. Companies who celebrate diversity and who have employees who feel comfortable being themselves and bringing their whole selves to work have higher self-identification rates, both with job seekers and also employees. So how can we cut through this fear and make a tangible impact on our business and also increase our self-identification numbers. One way is get active in the disability community. It's a bit harder with COVID and everything going on, but digital connections can still be made with LinkedIn, phone calls, Zoom calls, Teams calls, and you can make connections with leaders of community organizations. And those are organizations, for example, like your local vocational rehabilitation, your local workforce agency, Goodwill, Easter Seals, Wounded Warriors, the VA. And so what you can do, you can attend virtual job fairs, in-person job fairs once things settle down, open houses. You can volunteer for events such as resume workshops. And so getting your name out there as an employer who is supportive of the disability community is huge. And it's really a first icebreaker and kind of clears the way for additional progress with disability hiring and your reputation in the disability community. So getting your name out there, makes job seekers feel more comfortable with you. And guess what? That's going to lead to self-identification increases, and it's going to bring you people with disabilities who want to work for you because you support their community. You can also further connect with these organizations about what positions that you have open that you're currently looking to fill. You can also have them on site for a tour of the facility, or maybe virtual these days, or maybe show a virtual, this is what a day in the life of the position I'm looking to recruit for would look like. Those are helpful. Or even simple Q&As with hiring managers. It's just going to best arm those organizations with the information on the kind of talent you're looking for and the qualifications, and then go hire people with disabilities. As simple as that. Am I saying that you need to hire every single person that comes in that has a disability just because they have a disability? Absolutely not. You're still just going to hire the best person for the job, and as Kevin likes to say, it just may so happen that they have a disability. So you're going to work with community organizations to hire the best person for the job and provide them feedback on their candidates, how they can improve and better recruit for you. Just kind of view them as a partner. Finally, here to dispel the fears, you got to make sure that you live up to your word as well. And so if you make commitments for virtual job fairs or in-person events, you want to make sure that you keep those. And if you want to hire people with disabilities and want to work with these community organizations that seek employment for this population, you got to show them some love and attention as well. We all know that business is fast-paced, and people usually have a full plate of activities and a full calendar. But these community events and partnerships usually suffer as a result, and they're one of the first things to go, and they get lost in the shuffle. So approach these partnerships with the team so that your business can always keep that communication alive and the good work going. So our second pillar here is education. So we went through that definition of disability earlier, touched on some disabilities that may have surprised some of you on the webinar here. And it leads us to a bit of a strange question. Is it possible to have a disability and not know it? And the short answer to that question is yes. And I'll use my own history as an example here. I'm a person with severe asthma. I've had it my whole life and was hospitalized many times as I grew up. It's really a bad time in the world's history to have a respiratory condition. But I've always just kind of viewed it as my medical condition that I needed to work through. Everybody's got their own journey, and this was just mine. And so it wasn't until, ironically, I started working with Disability Solutions about 6 years ago that I realized that my asthma actually is a disability because it inhibits a life function, and that's being able to breathe. So I'm a person who fit the definition of a disability and could have been checking that self-identification box for my employer, but I wasn't, because I had no idea that my medical condition was a disability. Another example in-house here is, my wife also has ADHD and anxiety. So same situation about 6 years ago. I said, hey, I found out that I have one disability, but you have two. So I'm sure you could probably imagine that reaction. I'm not disabled, and maybe some other comments, but now she gets it. she's a person who had 2 disabilities, who had no idea whatsoever. So the question I pose to you now is, how many people are there in your organization right now who are just like us? People who have medical conditions that fit the definition of disability, who just need some basic education on disabilities, who can start checking those boxes for you also. So ongoing education and clarity, those are key. My wife and I were in initial denial when we found out, no way we have disabilities, we're not disabled, and that's a natural reaction, and that's okay. Kevin and I conduct disability fear and stigma trainings for a lot of companies, and frequently we have folks come up to us afterward or shoot us a quick email afterward and say, wow, I can't believe that I just found out I have a disability today. And this type of education is going to help you drive internal self-identifications with your existing employees, and it's also going to trickle out in the community as your employees tell their family members and friends as well. So how can we win with education? Well, we win with frequent and ongoing communication, and that's really what's going to set you apart from your competitors and give you an upper hand in disability recruitment and self-identifications. We recommend at least quarterly disability employer trainings. That's a great way to start. Disability employer trainings really help pave the way for diverse workforces. They cut through some of the anxiety and tension that still revolves around the word disability to this day. But also you need to make sure that your disability training and education is turnover proof. So if you have an outside company providing this, that's less of a concern on your end as far as its delivery. However, we've seen, if you deliver your own trainings or try to do this yourself, we've seen companies with great intentions, come to a complete standstill when the usually very passionate project owner either leaves the company or gets promoted or transitions into a new role. So awareness and education bring about an increase in self-identifications in all areas, but most prominently with your current employees. So the third piece to our pillars today are company culture. Job seekers and employers or employees usually do not self-identify unless they feel comfortable with your company on some level. So one of the main reasons for this discomfort can often be tied to your company culture. Are you an organization where it's okay to be different, or does everybody need to fit that cookie cutter mold? And that seems like a very basic question, right? But usually the answer is going to give you a very good read on your company culture. Now I'm talking about how your employees would answer that question and not you. So I'm sure that you would probably know how you would respond, but the real answers to that question are going to come from the employees who work with you and for you on the front lines, kind of entry-level employees, and throughout the organization. And that's going to tell you everything you need to know about how tolerant you are of individual differences and diversity. And so what we've seen is a lot of times there's a pretty big disconnect between HR teams and TA teams and the general employee population about whether a company is inclusive or embracing of those with disabilities. And so that gap right there, that can explain why self-identifications are low. And really, here's why. So if your company is perceived by its employees as not a great place for people with disabilities to work in, there are usually a couple of things that are going to happen. For one, those employees who currently work for you, they definitely aren't going to self-identify or update their status or check yes. They're also going to spread that to their coworkers, friends, family members who may be considering your company for employment. But remember, just like anything else, bad news spreads faster and broader than good news does. But the flip side of the coin is the good news will spread. So especially if your culture is inclusive, it hires and values people with disabilities, we tell our family, our friends, it filters out into local community organizations who in turn, they choose to work for you. And oh, by the way, they also buy your products and services because you support their community. So the key is to get a true read on your staff, on your culture. So if you're just asking someone who directly reports to you, is this a great place to work for people with disabilities? I'm going to guess it. You're going to get yes, or absolutely we're inclusive, or yes, this is the best company ever, something along those lines. But you need to informally seek this information. So people are going to open up if they, if it's anonymous, or if they don't fear retribution, or they think that you're going to use it against them for advancement opportunities. So how can we win with company culture here? We got to find the true pulse of that culture. And so if you aren't inclusive, which was some of you said that you were today with the survey question, and that's okay. We want you to begin with yourself, with that person first language. Also think about disability employer trainings for your team. Also build partnerships with local community organizations and start hiring people with disabilities. Everyone can talk about culture and have endless meetings about culture, Zoom meetings, Teams meetings, conference calls, you name it. And nothing gets done. But really, culture change can start on an individual level. And so, you can be the first one to take that step. If your company has ERGs, employee resource groups, or BRGs, whatever your terminology is, do you have a disability themed resource group? Something to think about, because companies who have active participation with those groups, especially when one has a disability focus, do tend to have higher self-identification rates. And I think that takes us to our third poll today, third and final.
All right, I'm gonna launch this one. All right, when was your last self-identification campaign? So within the last 5 years, we're currently planning ours now, or never, which does happen. All right, we have a lot of folks participating. We're going to give this about 10 more seconds. I'll close it out and launch the results. All right, we'll close it, launch it.
All right, excellent. So kind of a mixed bag here. So some of you, about 40% within the last 5 years, have done a self-identification campaign, which is awesome. 40% planning it now, 20% never. That's kind of what we see across the board. And so kudos to those 80% of you who are either have done it or in the process of doing it. It's really very impactful, especially when you couple it with education and shedding light on some of the unique voices that currently work for you. And for the 20% that said never, today starts step one. So we thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to pass you back to Kevin. He's going to close us out here today.
All right, thank you, Keith. So before you start your self-identification campaign, you're going to want to see where you are at now. You can usually work with your ATS vendor or your current internal systems to see the numbers of those who are currently working in your company who have identified as a person with a disability. And if you're like the majority of companies out there, you're definitely going to see this number. You're going to freak out a little bit, and you're going to want to increase this number over time. An internal campaign must be done right, though, if you want to guarantee some great results. Simply sending out communication asking for people to update their profile if they identify as a person with a disability most likely won't do the trick. We want to make sure your message is comforting, possibly adding some additional education on the different types of disabilities out there, as we discussed. As Keith mentioned before, we do trainings all the time, and those leaders come up after us. After the presentation, suddenly realizing that they have a disability and they never checked the box. Someone with diabetes or someone who is a cancer survivor, all that good stuff. Utilize leadership in these videos and campaigns. Utilize your ERGs if you have them. If you don't, make sure you have one. Not only to really communicate the message, but be a part of that campaign as well. The better the communication and approach, the better results you're definitely going to have. As we discussed earlier, people with disabilities typically don't self-identify. The more images and videos and information on your external and internal sites, the more your employers and applicants are going to feel comfortable and prideful in doing so. So we're going to share a video from our Disability Solutions first ever client, PepsiCo, that they released in 2019. The video is called You Belong Here. This video highlights employees with disabilities. What can you do to take action today? Again, start using that person first language. Again, really emphasis on deleting some of those terms from your vocabulary. Understand the definition of disability and all the different types of disabilities out there. Remember, 7% are hidden or invisible disabilities. So I guarantee you have individuals working for you right now, either or not, checking the box. Does your company have an existing portal where you can change your self-ID status, internal self-ID campaigns, positive messaging and imagery from your CEOs and leaders on your websites? And ERG, if you don't have a disability ERG, definitely get one going. I'm sure you get lots of participations, and also get involved in the community when you want to start hiring people with disabilities as well. With all that said, I will throw it over to Tim for the Q&A.
All right. Do we have any questions out there? I know we're running a little bit over. Let's see here. I do have a question actually for you, Kevin and Keith. Can you talk about PTSD and some of the stigmas that kind of go along with that? You know, myself being former military, it's, you know, I think there's a lot of stigma, and how do you kind of overcome some of those stigmas related to PTSD?
Sure. So we have a whole presentation on some of that stuff as well. But I really like you just got to look at the stats. You know, we always like to say the news in Hollywood's done a pretty good job of, you know, at mental health in general, looking at it as, you know, people are dangerous or, you know, don't know what's going on in the world, and you know, schizophrenia and stuff like that, when it's a really small number of individuals with PTSD are committing any violent acts at all. So there's individuals you're probably working with, whether they're in the military or a car accident or something happened in their childhood, who you know, suffer some kind of PTSD. And so we just want to make sure that again, there's a huge stigma around that when it's just not true. It's a lot of individuals with PTSD are allowed to get around a bit. You know, they have whether medication or therapy or whatever their coping methods are to get around that and to be successful individuals, not in society, but also as employees as well. So yeah, again, I always blame Hollywood in the news for causing that stigma. 100%.
A lot of war movies. Let's see here. Do you have any, you know, I think about, you know, many companies I've worked for, and, you know, hiring managers talk about, well, someone with a disability can't do that job. And I mean, have you ever come across, you know, that scenario where you're kind of getting this pushback? Well, anyone with a disability can't do that job. And how do you handle those types of, say, hiring managers?
Sure. Yeah, Tim, we get that all the time. There are two pushbacks we usually get. Is one is disabilities equal accommodations, which absolutely isn't correct. And the other one is, you know, people with disabilities can't do our jobs. We even hear we don't hire people with disabilities. And I know it's kind of a punch in the gut, I'd say, really. But what would you do if you said, you know, women couldn't do these jobs, or we don't hire women? It's the same thing. So again, we look at the talent. We're looking at the person. Just because they have a specific disability doesn't mean they are exactly at everyone who has that disability. So we're trying to look at the talent rather than the disability. And again, there's various different types of disabilities out there and various versions of specific disabilities. So again, we're trying to find the right talent for the right job. And you know, we work with a lot of warehouses, and we hear, you know, a person with a wheelchair can do this job, and they're in most cases they're absolutely right. It's not a job fit for someone who utilizes a wheelchair. So again, finding the right talent for that right job. But again, another stigma is people with disabilities can't do our types of jobs. But again, we've hired salespeople, warehouse workers, engineers, scientists, all many fields, all many successful people with disabilities. Keith, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I would say, you know, hiring managers, that's really where the rubber meets the road for a lot of companies. And what we see is, that hiring manager has usually been around for a long number of years. They've achieved a certain level of kind of power / clout. And so it's kind of their way. And a lot of companies kind of will look the other way, right? And so those are folks we're trying to reach, especially with education. And, as Kevin mentioned, disability doesn't equal accommodation. I can't emphasize that enough. Every business we talk to, or a good percentage, think that when we start talking about disability employment, oh my gosh, thousands of accommodations, hundreds of thousands of accommodations. And that's just simply not true. You're just hiring great folks, who have different unique life experiences as well. And just, kind of touch on that first question with PTSD. Anybody can have PTSD. Anybody who goes through a traumatic scenario could have PTSD. I had a friend who worked in a restaurant and was robbed at gunpoint, suffered PTSD, and still to this day struggles to kind of be in a room by himself. And so, people like that. It's not kind of what is sensationalized in the media, and it's not strictly relegated to a condition that veterans experience too. So all great questions.
Great. So what can senior leadership do to help push this along within their organization? That, obviously we've seen a great video here by PepsiCo and a lot of senior leadership in that video. But what, if you think about starting from the top, what can they do to help?
Yeah, Keith, you want to talk a little bit about the work you're doing with BMS?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's these things are really, really great if they're organic, right? But you also do need some senior leadership buy-in, and they need to support what you're doing. And so it's also important to kind of, show the business angle of hiring people with disabilities, because your senior leadership may think, oh, this is a kind of a great, real feel good type thing that we're doing. But when you're actually able to kind of lay dollars and cents and the methodology behind hiring people with disabilities, and that, that group of people, the purchasing power, and, the staying power of folks with disabilities staying on jobs longer and getting promoted, that presents a much more compelling narrative to senior leadership to kind of buy into this. And, you do need them to buy in and support this if you want it to have legs organization-wide. What we've seen is sometimes, local chapters or local areas of certain businesses do really well at disability hiring, let's say Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then the other 100 regions and geographies of the company have no knowledge of this or no interest. And so that can all be remedied with a coordinated buy-in with your senior leadership, but it's also arming them with statistics and facts that back up why hiring people with disabilities makes great business sense, which Kevin went through earlier.
Great. Thank you, Keith. And I think that is that's the end of the questions here. So obviously everyone that's still on, you have some email addresses here, websites for Disability Solutions to reach Kevin and Keith if you have additional questions about their services or Disability Solutions in general.